Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. I am your host, as always, Bloody Bill Vox. Thankfully, I'm not actually bloody. This is a fun moniker I had back in my wrestling days. But it's me, back again for another great episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. This is episode 15, as I said. And I felt the need to say the episode number today because we had talked previously about disputing whether or not this was my longest-running podcast compared to my old one, the Wrestling War Room, back in the day where I was reviewing events and DVD releases and books and whatever. This is definitely the longest. So thank you for being along for the ride, whether you've been on YouTube or Spotify. The majority of the crowd seems to be on YouTube. I actually just got some analytics back about the podcast. I'm pleased with how it's doing over there. I'm a simple guy. I don't ask for a lot, and I don't expect a lot. So the fact that anybody even listens in and gives it shares, and that was the one piece of analytic that I was very surprised about. Like, and I know some of the shares are attributed to me, but for the number that I saw there, I was like, I didn't share this episode that many times. So to those of you out there, we do it live, friends. That was not a tape glitch. That was a Bloody Bill glitch. To those of you that have been sharing it, as I always say, there we go. Thank you so much for putting the word out there, spreading the word of the podcast, Dropkicks and Joysticks. And as we always do, to kick things off at the top half of the show, let's talk a little bit about current events. As I sit here recording this episode, it is October 10th. It's a Tuesday. It's the day of the big head-to-head between NXT and AEW. NXT basically putting on a Wrestlemania from the Performance Center tonight. And AEW also coming out hot and heavy with a Title Tuesday. They're even doing a buy-in. So as I record this episode, I have no clue how that was going to play out for everybody. I've seen a lot of discourse about it, though, so we can talk about that part. Obviously, when this episode drops, the dust will be 6 days old on the competition. We'll know who did what for viewership and all of that. But one thing I've been seeing is a lot of people are upset with WWE for stacking the deck. We've got John Cena, Cody Rhodes, Asuka, Becky Lynch, The Undertaker's gong. So everybody is upset with WWE because Triple H and I believe others at one point in time basically said they don't view AEW as competition. So they're like, oh, well, if you don't view AEW as competition, why are we stacking the deck? Why aren't you just doing a normal show? Blah, blah, freaking blah. I almost posted this on Twitter, and I really like to stay out of that discourse. But if you'd like to follow me for when I do get involved, it's at Bloody Bill Vox. I almost said, so basically what you're telling me, if you're mad about this, is that if you owned a pizza shop and you had a regular customer base and a pizza shop from another town came in and set up a tent right next door, that you do nothing. This pizza shop from another town, just for a day, is coming into town. They're setting up a tent right next door. They're opening that tent from the same time you open to the same time you close. And they're looking to get some business. They're running a sale even to cut into your regular customer base. So in that argument, equating wrestling to pizza, these people that are mad are saying that essentially WWE is the regular pizza shop on Tuesday, shouldn't care that the neighboring pizza shop is coming in and opening up for the same hours they are, right next door to them. Because that's essentially what's happening tonight. AEW is Wednesday. And previously, AEW won that head-to-head on Wednesdays when it was AEW versus NXT. And, people like to dismiss the developmental brand argument. I would have dismissed it more when they beat them originally. Now it is totally a developmental brand. So, obviously, AEW wants to go guns a-blazing against this developmental brand because if they can beat any of WWE's properties, it's a plus for them. But for the people that are out there mad that WWE is stacking the deck, I really hope that you're never in business or never in a competition with somebody. And, WWE can say they don't view AEW as competition all they want, but if you're on the same night, it's competition. They may not view them as regular competition, but you can bet your bottom dollar they see AEW television as their competition on a pay-per-view night or a PLE night. Although it's been a proven thing already very early in the Collision versus PLE, that Collision's going to lose every single time. In fact, I think they really got beat up pretty good for the most recent PLE that happened 3 days before this episode is recorded. Fastlane. It was a 5-match card. Super solid. Really confused by the Cody Rhodes and Jey Uso tag team title reign. I think I said it on this show last week, or I might have said it during a Twitch broadcast, but my prediction was that Cody Rhodes would not touch championship gold until he defeated Roman Reigns or defeated somebody to become the equivalent of the World Heavyweight Champion. And, well, I was proven wrong on that one. So I'm not quite sure what we're doing here. WWE loves using tag titles as story devices versus actually building a division, because Cody had his story to finish, thought Jey Uso is being built up as a single star, and now they're in a tag team, albeit a very entertaining one. If you watch the press conference after Fastlane, and if you've been on social media at all in the days after Fastlane, you saw the clips. Those guys were lit. They let us know they were lit ahead of time also, which was hilarious. Full disclosure, Moose and I may have had a few libations in the bus. In other words, they were drunk. Those guys were drunk, but it was a playful drunk. I don't think they made an embarrassment out of themselves or the WWE. Obviously, if the company had a real problem with it, they would have shut them down. So it was entertaining, but I'm still very confused by that outcome. I figured we'd see some Jimmy Uso and Solo Sikoa interference there to push that story, but I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong on that one. In other spots on the card, Seth Rollins retained over Shinsuke Nakamura. Disappointed in that one, only because I hate when they build up these guys that could be champions. They build them up as credible, and then they beat them not only once, but then they beat them again in the gimmick match. It's a weird thing WWE has done time and time again when they're trying to keep a babyface champion strong, and that's what they're doing with Seth Rollins, because I think we're heading towards an inevitable Seth versus Roman at Survivor Series, assuming they do their usual champion versus champion stuff. If they do that, Roman obviously is going to be champion come Survivor Series, and I think Seth Rollins is going to remain champion all the way there, and then they get to run back that Rumble situation. But I was hoping Nakamura would pull out a victory here, even though I kind of knew that he wasn't going to. I don't like that. Build him up, make him strong, and then squash him out. And then this morning I was kind of skimming the Monday Night Raw results for October 9th, and it seems like Shinsuke Nakamura is going to settle into a mid-card feud with Ricochet coming out of his world title feud. So, that was a bummer. Io Sky retained her women's championship. That was a really fun match. What else did we have on that card? I'm very forgetful. We've established this already in the past, but thankfully I can pull them up really quickly. Oh, Carlito came back. Not quite sure whether he's definitely a member of the LWO or whether he was just a friend helping out a friend. But in true Carlito form, he showed up late, and it was great. And that rhymed. But Carlito back looking better than ever. I mean, that his physique was just something out of this world. And he looks great. He looks relaxed. He looks rejuvenated. I know he's been working all these years, but looks like a different Carlito than the last time he was in WWE. John Cena and LA Knight got the win over Jimmy Uso and Solo Sikoa. No big surprise there. I didn't really think that John Cena was or LA Knight were going to do a job in this tag team match. I always thought maybe there was a potential that the Bloodline stood tall afterwards, but coming in, to me, there was no doubt that Cena and LA Knight were going to be victorious. Let's see. We covered the tag match, 6-man, women's match. That's the card. Well, that was it. That was the Fastlane card. And of course, we talked about Jade Cargill signing with WWE previously, and she made her first appearance, not with any of these rumored names that were trademarked by WWE recently. Everybody sees these trademark names and they automatically assume that it's for somebody coming in. In fact, there's talk as I record this episode that Brian Pillman Jr. is not going to be Brian Pillman Jr., despite the fact that he's in the vignette wearing his dad's shirt. And they're showing Cincinnati Bengals footage and WCW footage. It was like Lexi King or Black or something like that, and the internet was real quick to find a tie to the name. I believe the first name would pay tribute to his sister who passed away in a car accident, and then the last name, whatever that was, I think it was King, would have paid tribute to his mother, Melody. Like, great tie in there, but I don't know. Why wouldn't we debut him as Brian Pillman Jr.? I mean, Braun Breaker has worked out for the best, I think, especially in light of what happened with Rick Steiner over WrestleMania weekend. I think if he had had the last name Steiner, it might have reflected badly on him. But because it was Breaker, I think it was a little easier to separate the two. But when Breaker came in, I don't recall them relying heavily on the Steiner lineage. It was kind of mentioned. These vignettes for Pillman Jr. are relying on his dad's lineage. So if they give him a different name and he gives that tribute reason, hey, awesome. Yes, I am Brian Pillman Jr., but, I've chosen to take on this name. Kind of like what are some of the folks that came in and had reasons for changing their name? I think Asuka had a reason when she came in as Kana and it changed to Asuka. Kenta, when he came in and they changed it to Hideo Itami. I believe they put backstories on that sort of stuff. So, maybe Pillman Jr. will put a backstory on the name Lexi King or Lexi Black, whatever it might have been. But I'd be surprised if he wasn't Brian Pillman Jr. But as we all know, WWE loves to own their trademarks in their names. But when it's the person's real name and they've already worked under it, I mean, I don't know, just work something out. Work something out with that licensing. So everybody can keep their names and, whatnot. Hate to see somebody have to sign over their birth name, essentially, to WWE, but what you going to do? But I think it's about enough talk of the current scene here. Obviously, like I said, it's Tuesday afternoon, so we don't know how the head-to-head is going to play out. By the time next week's episode drops, episode 16, I'll be able to tell you. I'll be able to tell you exactly how things played out. But just a quick circle back, though, to last week's episode on Backyard Wrestling. I wondered out loud. I was like, why on earth did I subject myself to Backyard Wrestling? Because the game is just so fast-paced. There wasn't even a theme. I thought maybe I had a theme for this month. Obviously, In Your House, when this episode drops, it's going to be October, 16th is the date as this episode drops. This game, In Your House, that we're going to talk about today, came out November 1st, 1996. So I didn't have an anniversary theme, but I think literally the reason why Backyard Wrestling got chosen was because it was the 20-year anniversary. I think that's the only reason, because I had no big memories from back in the day, and I just played it a bunch leading up. In fact, I just realized that I'll probably have to take care of this. I never posted the individual content, the matches and stuff. I should do that. I'm going to put that on a to-do list. But enough of all that jibber-jabber. It's been about 15 minutes now. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's get to the topic of discussion. Let's get to WWF In Your House for the PlayStation 1. Also released on the Sega Saturn and MS-DOS. That's right, you could play it on the PC. Came out on November 1st, 1996. on those 3 platforms. Finding ratings for this was tough. IGN didn't do a review. I plugged in some of the other normals that I tend to reference. The only one that I could find that gave it a review, and I'm noticing a trend with these guys, but GameSpot gave it a 4.5 out of 10. GameSpot seems to be angry. Their reviews are always the lowest out of the various games so far. I mean, we're only 15 episodes in, but they're always the lowest. And they're always drastically different than the others. It's not like 4.5 versus 5. It's like 4.5 versus 6.5. So, I don't know, GameSpot, you guys angry? I don't know. But as always, unless I note otherwise throughout the episode, and this week there is no other source. Going through the notes real fast. Yeah, no other sources this week, but as I always like to say at the top, unless otherwise noted, all of the information here is derived from the SmackDown Hotel or my own playing. But generally speaking, SmackDown Hotel tends to have all the best information on all the wrestling games out there. And I even just realized and learned recently they have a results bank. Because, looking up WWF In Your House, turns out they got a results bank as well for wrestling events. I don't know how deep or expansive it is, but turns out they got that too. But anyway, this write-up, of course, is courtesy of the SmackDown Hotel, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about it. WWF In Your House is a wrestling video game released in 1996 for the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and DOS. Developed by Sculptured Software, it is a follow-up to WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game, and was published by Acclaim Entertainment, who had previously released WrestleMania for home consoles. The game is a hybrid of a wrestling game and arcade versus fighter with over-the-top, unrealistic moves. Get into the ring with 10 of the biggest WWF stars, like the British Bulldog, Goldust, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, and The Ultimate Warrior. After you select a wrestler, take on the challenges of the WWF Season, Intercontinental Championship, and WWF Championship modes. If you find yourself losing a match, you can unleash special moves to quickly even the score. The only way to become the king of the ring is to play WWF In Your House. It's an interesting starter note. I don't know why that tickles me, but the only way to become king of the ring is to be playing in your house. Ironically enough, this game does not feature a King of the Ring mode. There's no tournament mode in this game at all. So it's, I don't know, that tickled me in a way I wasn't expecting. Maybe if there was a tournament mode, we could have said that you become King of the Ring. But I suppose maybe if you win all of the modes, because, they kind of did some of the work for us. Let's talk about the modes. You've got Season mode, Intercontinental Championship mode, and WWF Championship mode. The Intercontinental Championship and WWF Championship mode are very similar to the WrestleMania, the arcade game modes. The Intercontinental Championship starts off easy and gets progressively hard. You start with singles matches and work into handicap matches, whereas the WWF Championship mode, you start off with handicap matches and they just get progressively harder. First it's 1-on-2, then it's 1-on-3, and I think in the very end, it's you against the entire damn roster. So very much the same modes there, just different characters. Season mode is where you take on everybody in the game. So it's not the same as, it's not the same as the Intercontinental Championship and WWF Championship modes, but it is the same at the exact same time. It's just, I think it's a little more straightforward. You play through all the characters in the game, and if you beat the mode, you get a special, not a Titantron, but you get a special video at the very end. So that's a fun little thing to play through. If you like to be rewarded for your play at the end, that's motivation to play with all of the different members of the roster. We mentioned some of them during that introduction from SmackDown Hotel, but let's read the full roster and get everybody in here. So we got the British Bulldog, Goldust, Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Ahmed Johnson, Shawn Michaels, The Ultimate Warrior, and The Undertaker. Plus, we have Vince McMahon and Mr. Perfect delivering the commentary. An interesting note about the roster for this game is that, and this comes from the Collectorate, which is actually a wrestling figure blog, but I stumbled across them in this research, and I when I said, oh, there's nobody else, I embedded their credit into the start of the note. Usually I put it at the end. But anyway, I stumbled across this one, the Collectorate. They had posted some behind-the-scenes shots from the green screen capturings and that sort of stuff for In Your House. And so here's a note directly off of the Collectorate about a roster member who should have been in the game but was not. In sharing the images from behind the scenes, this is what they wrote. In a bit of a swerve from the usual figure postings, here's a look behind the scenes at the recording of the motion performances for the superstars in 1995 for In Your House. One cool thing to note is the inclusion of Jeff Jarrett, who was cut from the game after departing the company in 1996. Jarrett would have had to wait a few more years before his first appearance in a video game, a WWF video game, because he was in WCW's video games. But anyway, to be in a WWF game, you'd have to wait for WWF Attitude. So Jeff Jarrett was originally slated to be in the In Your House game. He was a major heel in the WWE during 1995, but as it is well known, he walked out of the company during 95 and would eventually surface in WCW in 96. As I noted, he was in WCW versus the World. But it's interesting that they did do work with him to have him in the game and to have him be a playable character. I think Jeff Jarrett in Your House would have been interesting. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be because, as we said, he left. And 9 times out of 10, if somebody leaves and there's room and time to take them out of the video game, they will absolutely take them out of the video game, as we have seen in previous years with the 2K series. People look at debuts and releases and say, oh, they got fired with enough time for them to not be in the next game, or, oh, they debuted with enough time for them to be in the next game. Like Cody Rhodes, for example, signing with the company with enough time to include him in 2K23, I believe it was. Yeah, that came out last year or the year before. I don't know. Whatever year Cody was in it first. I get my years confused. I'm getting tapped out and burnt out on the 2K series presently, and you'll have a chuckle at that at the end of the episode. But I digress. Let's get back to In Your House. The arenas in Your House were a lot different than we are used to. WrestleMania the arcade game was in one standard WWF themed arena. In Your House, we expanded the lineup a little bit here, and we have themed arenas for each of our roster members. So those arenas are Shawn Michaels' Club, which basically kind of looks like in its own arena. We got Bret the Hitman Hart's Dungeon, inspired by the actual dungeon in Calgary. The Undertaker's Crypt, Owen Hart's House of Cards, Goldust's Golden Casino in Las Vegas, British Bulldog's Buckingham Palace, Ahmed Johnson's Locker Room, Hunter Hearst Helmsley's Regal Home, The Ultimate Warrior's Parts Unknown, and Vader's Coal Mine. Now, I don't know that these are the official names for them. They don't flash the names and stuff. Some of these were included on SmackDown Hotel. Some of these I kind of just had to find in general Google search. And then some of them I just coined myself, namely The Ultimate Warrior and Vader's, because there was one website saying, why is The Ultimate Warrior's stage in a desert, and why is Vader's set around a bunch of coal? So maybe those are the real names, and I just didn't know it. But definitely different to not have them be in the the wrestling arena, but as we said at the top, reading the description, this game was, wrestling and arcade meets fighter with over-the-top, unrealistic moves and settings and that sort of stuff. So, is a nice touch, and I don't think we've done anything like that since in WWE games, in terms of, like, every match, it happens in the ring, but it's not in your standard arena. I guess you could count Battlegrounds, 2K Battlegrounds is something of that sort, but every character didn't have their own themed arena. So that's what, kind of made things unique about In Your House. Because you were able to, play in what is purported to be Shawn Michaels' house. Like, I remember when I played this game as a kid, thinking to myself, this game's called In Your House. I was like, this is gotta be like where these guys would live, like where the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels would live. Where the Undertaker would live. Obviously, the Ultimate Warrior is gonna live in Parts Unknown. We don't know where Parts Unknown is, but we just know that that's where he hangs out when he's not in the ring. So it was almost like a behind the scenes look, in a way, in an era where kayfabe was still very much alive and still thriving, and it was still real to everybody. Damn it! I thought that was a nice touch. So last week, I talked about how I would share a story about how I never actually owned this game as a kid, but I've got a host of memories. This game also fed my theme song love, so we'll tell a couple of stories in one here. But yes, I never actually owned a copy of WWF In Your House as a kid. I owned a copy of Wrestlemania, the arcade game. I remember I got it for Christmas, using either cash that I got or a Toys R Us gift card. I had the big bulky one. When PlayStation 1 cases were those big tall things, they almost looked like the Sega CD cases before they went to the standard CD style. CD style. So I had a copy of that, but I never had a copy of PlayStation 1 because it came in an era of time, like 1996. November 1996, I am 11 years old. So obviously I ain't got no job. I don't have much money. And, I can't be asking for games. And if I recall, Christmas in 96, I was probably pining for an N64. Maybe. Yeah, I was probably pining for a Nintendo 64. That seems to make the most sense to me. Is that I was probably asking for a console. Yeah, that bad boy came out September 26, 1996. So I was definitely trying to get me a Nintendo 64 for Christmas. And I didn't end up getting it for Christmas, but I got enough cash and gift cards and things of that sort that I remember going to KB Toys and picking it up. But anyway, typically speaking, I didn't have that kind of money to go buy. At the time, I'd be willing to bet In Your House on the PlayStation 1 probably ranged between $50 and $60 brand new, because it's funny to look back and see that, like, a Super Nintendo game, these cartridges, in some cases you can buy for $5 used. Like I got a copy of Madden NFL 96. It's just a nostalgia thing. I paid $5 for it. If I bought that when it came out new, I might have paid $70 for it. It's just funny that, we look at the $70 price tag today for a lot of these new games and say, oh my God, that's so expensive. But it was expensive back then. So, $70 in 96 money, probably meant a lot more to households too. So, but I never owned a copy of this game. But I always finessed a way to either rent it on a special, like, find it on that 99 cent for 5 days. But because wrestling was popular, it wasn't always there. So I had friends that had copies of this game, and I had games that they wanted to borrow. So we finessed trades in that way. I would even go so far. This was a gamble that never blew up in my face, but what a gamble it could have been. I would go so far as to rent a game from the store, the rental place, because I was allowed to go pick it up myself. I'd rent the game, bring the game to school, get the copy of In Your House from my friend, give him the rental copy, and then after 5 days, he'd bring that stuff back to me because I passed by the video store on the way home. The video store was called Home Vision Video. And so the way that I could walk home from school, I could basically do like a U-shape and pass by the video place. Now, if I walked a different way, it would take me a little less time. But if you walk down this main strip, you could stop for a snack. You could rent the game on the way home. So I always liked taking that path. But that's how I always managed to have a copy of In Your House in my possession. Basically, I would not exploit, but I'd finesse my way into figuring out who had a copy of the game and who'd be willing to do trades. You know, hey, can I borrow it for, this week? And, you bring it in on Monday. I'll bring in the game you want on Monday. And then on Friday, we bring them back and we'll trade before the weekend. And so that's how I'd spend my Monday through Friday playing In Your House during that era where I was getting the trade. And it was fantastic. And then another reason why I was always trying to get my hands on the In Your House is because this was the first situation where I was able to get crystal clear recordings of WWF theme songs. I believe Full Metal had come out the year before. I believe that came out in 1995. Yeah, October of 1995. So that had some theme songs on it. Yes, absolutely. But it didn't have The Ultimate Warrior. It didn't have Ahmed Johnson. It didn't have, let's go through the roster here. It didn't have the British Bulldog. It did have Goldust. It did have Bret Hart. It didn't have Owen. It didn't have Triple H. It didn't have Ahmed Johnson. It had the wrong version of Shawn Michaels. It didn't have The Ultimate Warrior. It didn't have the current version of the theme The Undertaker was using. So this game, and I don't even remember to this day how I accessed. Oh, it's in the sound menu. This game. And you go through all the different sounds. Eventually, you get to sounds for each wrestler that is their theme song. And if I remember, it's like a, 90-second or a 2-minute cut. So you get to that point, you play it, and you can listen to the theme songs for the people in the game. Now, I say this is the first time I was able to get crystal clear versions because up until this point, I think we've been downloading theme songs off of AOL and they sounded like garbage or, recordings off of television or whatever the case was. Maybe this dates me a little bit and it exposes my age. I mean, I've talked about it before. I'm 38 years old. I'll be 39 in January, heading towards my 40s in a year and a half. It's fine. But what I had going on in my bedroom as a kid at this time, I remember my mother had given me her old dresser. It was a 3-drawer on each side, so 6-drawer gimmick, and it had this big mirror attached to the back of it. And I had no use for big mirrors, so on that dresser, I had my TV, which was moderately sized at that point in time. I had the old VCR, because, at that point in time, I don't think we had a DVD player yet. I think that was still to come in like a year or something. And then I had not a bottom of the barrel, but not a top of the line stereo. I think a neighbor had actually given it to us at one point in time at a previous residence, and I just hung on to it. And, it was a double tape deck, had a record player, had a couple speakers, and had auxiliary, imports. So I had, my TV, VCR, PlayStation 1 setup all rigged in to this stereo. I think you can kind of figure out where I'm going here. So with the sound feeding in to the stereo, I could record. So I would pop in a cassette tape and basically made my own WWF The Music album with the theme songs in Your House. The only drawback And now in today's world, I could remedy this no problem because, you plug the PlayStation in into a different means and you could record it right on your laptop. The only problem that there was with doing the recording like that is you had to record a little bit ahead of time of the dead air. And then you got the ding that you would get when you selected the sound. So for the most part, you got the full theme. And for me, as a guy that loved his theme songs and would record them off of VHS tapes and things of that sort, like I remember recording Jake the Snake Roberts' theme somehow was used for a Hulk Hogan workout vignette in a tape that I had borrowed from my neighbor. But once I discovered that it was crystal clear and it was full, I hooked that bad boy up to the stereo, recorded myself Jake the Snake Roberts' theme. Did the same thing with the Ultimate Warrior's theme song. The actual version, not the loop that they've released time and time again. You see it out there, Wildfire, remastered, arena version, whatever, Warrior Wildfire. I recorded that off of a Survivor Series broadcast. So I was heavy into my recordings of theme songs. But In Your House was a big source for it, because in '96, it was either VHS tapes where it was clear, or on TV when the commentators wouldn't talk. So you'd still get the crowd and the wrestler talking if they talked to the camera, but you got the theme song pretty clear. I remember that's how one of my earliest recordings of the DX theme I had in my possession on a cassette tape came from a Monday Night Raw where Rick Rude came out and just did the introduction, and then the theme played with nobody talking until they got to the ring. So let's start working our way down here towards the end of the discussion on the game itself, because this game is limited. We don't want to spin our wheels in discussion, but at the end of the day, this was a follow-up to WrestleMania the arcade game, and it was essentially WrestleMania the arcade game part 2. Like one of my notes here says, this was basically WrestleMania the arcade game part 2, but even with more of the Mortal Kombat influences, it somehow lacked. That was just one of my upfront notes. So I guess we could get into the final review, and then... no, you know what? Before we get into the final review, I'm gonna bring something in that I had said that I was going to start doing, and then, of course, like a total space cadet, I forgot all about doing, and it has not become a feature of the show, but we're going to do it this time, and now I've got it in my notes template, so it will become a regular fixture. If we're covering a company, we'll look at what was going on in the company at the time of the game's release. If it is a general title with no allegiance to anybody, we'll look at wrestling as a whole at the time of the game's release. So, looking back at WWE at the time, WWF, in November of 1996, we had Stone Cold Steve Austin emerging as a brand new star. He had won the King of the Ring in June and was heading towards a Survivor Series showdown with the returning Bret the Hitman Hart. There had been a lot of discourse and chatter about Bret Hart maybe going to WCW in 1996, a point that is still disputed between Eric Bischoff and Bret Hart to this day. But Steve Austin was a star in the making. Bret Hart was a star returning. They were heading for a collision at Survivor Series just weeks after the release of this game. Shawn Michaels, speaking of that Survivor Series that was coming up, he had won the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 12, and his run with the gold was getting ready to come to an end as well in just a couple of weeks after this game. In fact, 16 days after this game was released. I just looked it up real fast. November 17th, 1996. In fact, the promotional poster for Survivor Series features Shawn Michaels, Psycho Sid, Bret Hart, and Steve Austin. Psycho Sid, not in this game. I don't know if his return to the company in 90... yeah, it had to have been way too late. If they were doing scans in 95, it was obviously way too late. But Psycho Sid having like an insane asylum in this game would have been fantastic. The Undertaker was still embroiled in his feud with Mankind after Paul Bearer returned on The Undertaker at SummerSlam. And just a few weeks prior to this game coming out, at In Your House Buried Alive, The Undertaker and Mankind had the very first Buried Alive match. Ahmed Johnson had been a rising star in the WWE, but about 2 months before this game, he got his spleen or his kidneys kicked into outer space by Farouk. So his star would actually start to decline quite a bit in early 1997. I think one of Ahmed Johnson's last shining moments in the World Wrestling Federation might have been WrestleMania 13, and then I think it was kind of all downhill from there for old Ahmed. Of course, the Ultimate Warrior in this game, he was all over the place, left and right. In fact, when this game came out, he was already gone from the company again. He had been gone since July. He was supposed to be a part of a team at, I believe it was In Your House International Incident. In fact, that's where Psycho Sid returned. I guess maybe we could have slotted Sid in for the Warrior, but I imagine the Ultimate Warrior was allowed to stay in the game because it was so late. He left the company in July. This game came out in November. So let's see, who else is in this game? Talking about them. Hunter Hearst Helmsley was eating a bunch of shit at this point in life in November of 1996. Unfortunately, he was the one who caught all the heat for the curtain call that had taken place in May of that year on the final night, May 19th, 1996, the final night of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash before they went to WCW. Shawn Michaels was a top guy, and Triple H was not. It's, obviously long been talked about how Triple H was slated to win the King of the Ring in 96, that Steve Austin won. But look at how things worked out in the end. We made 2 stars, ultimately. The British Bulldog and Owen Hart were in a tag team at this point of the year. I don't think the European Championship had come around yet. No, the European Championship would come around in early 97. But the Bulldog and Owen formed a great tag team in 96. They had a lot of success as tag team champions. I don't think they were tag team champions at the time this game's released, but I could be wrong, and I've done enough on the fly looking up, so if you're curious about that, you go find it on Google. My Google machine's broken at the moment. How about that? It's not really. So let's see. For some reason, I left Vader out of my roster listing. I don't know why I did that. Did I match all those up? I may have some discrepancies here. I think I just discovered a note error. Note error. So let's see. Bulldog for Bulldog. Got that. Goldust for Goldust. Bret for Bret. Owen for Owen. Hunter Hearst Helmsley for Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Ahmed for Ahmed. Shawn Michaels for Shawn Michaels. Warrior for Warrior. Taker for Taker. Oh, yeah. I left Vader out of my roster list. Vader's the only guy I don't have a cross-reference to from roster to arena. But speaking of Vader, his star was fading big time at this point. At the time this game's release, he was coming off of a failed program for the WWF Championship with Shawn Michaels that was allegedly supposed to be a 3-part series that would have concluded at the 1996, or not concluded at the 96 Survivor Series. In fact, I believe the original plan was they have the original match at SummerSlam. Then at Survivor Series, Vader would win the championship from Shawn Michaels and hold it until the 97 Rumble, which they already knew was going to be in San Antonio. Ultimately, we slotted Sid into that spot. And as much as I love Vader, I think it worked out for the best. Maybe not so much for Vader, but with Sid in terms of how over he was. Vader they never seemed to get it right with Vader from the minute he debuted. Like, they started it right, but then they suspended him. He beats up Gorilla Monsoon, then he's suspended, then he's in a weird angle with Yokozuna, who's going through his own challenges at the time. And then it looks like they're going to do something with him. They get into the program with Shawn Michaels. That SummerSlam match was a disaster. And so, yeah, Vader's star was fading pretty hard at the time of this game's release. In terms of the company overall, times were not good for the World Wrestling Federation in November of 1996. They were about 5 months into an 83-week losing streak, well documented at this point, held as a podcast called 83 Weeks. But they were about 5 months into an 83-week losing streak to WCW Nitro that was running hot on the heels of the New World Order angle starting. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had come over in May and June to WCW. In June is when the streak started, and it did not stop for 83 weeks until 1998. I believe it was the night that Austin McMahon had their first encounter, and that is something I will do That is something I will do a quick Google search on to see when that ended. Yes, April 13th, 1998. That was the night that Nitro finally lost. And yes, it was Austin McMahon for the first time, teased in the ring. That was the night that WCW Nitro finally lost after 83 weeks. They rebounded the week after and won the ratings again. It started to be a bit of a back and forth after that. But at this point, when the game came out in 1996, things were not going well, and things didn't really start to take a turn for the WWE, despite the rise of Steve Austin and eventually the heel turn of Bret Hart and the reformation of the Hart Foundation. Things didn't really start to take a major turn until late 97 when the Montreal Screwjob went down, and then even in early 98 when we got Tyson involved, the rise of DX. And then obviously by April of 98, we finally got that win again on the WWE side. But then, it was back and forth. But then by 99, finger poke of doom, the infamous Mick Foley moment, it kind of went down. But, November 1st, 1996, it was still not good times for the World Wrestling Federation. So that's a fun little feature to bring into the show here. Like I had said, I meant to start mentioning it because I think it was the Revenge episode where I had found somebody's notes about what was going on in WCW at the time of that game's release, and I remember in that episode, it's like, that's a really cool idea. I'm going to bring that in as a feature, and I never did it. For some reason this week I remembered, and now that it's in my notes template, it'll stick there. So, when we do future weeks, we'll be able to cover what was going on. I think, talking about the month the game came out and then stuff surrounding it, because maybe something culminated in that month or began in that month, talk about where things went or where they came from makes a lot of sense. But, talking about at least the month the game came out, or, the month surrounding. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any favorite memories from November 1996 of your own that I didn't talk about, feel free to drop them in the comments, either on Spotify if you're listening or YouTube if you're watching. But let's get into the final review so we can wrap up this week's episode. As I always like to tell you, because I'm a bit of a scatterbrain, I pre-write my reviews so I'm not stumbling to remember stuff, because I play the games in advance to prep and to remember. And then we record the episode, see how long I rattle on, and then I record the gameplay afterwards. So I always like to read or write my review in advance, because I felt like I was always stumbling through that, and I stumble enough without stumbling on my final review. So let's get into it. Pre-written, as always, by yours truly, Bloody Bill Vox. This game was pretty much WrestleMania the arcade game, the sequel. But somehow it just didn't pack the same punch as WrestleMania, the arcade game. But all the same, it still holds a special place with me because of the uniqueness of the game, as we talked about earlier in the episode. Every superstar has their own layer, if you will, versus the traditional WWF arena. The roster was once again painfully small, but expanded to include at least more than 8, 10 this time, compared to WrestleMania the arcade game. This would be the last arcade-style game from the WWF games on the PlayStation for a while, as the next title would be more simulation-based with WWF Warzone in 1998. The power-ups were a nice callback to WrestleMania on the Nintendo. Back in that game, you used to see the little symbols flying across the screen, and that's how you would regenerate some of your health. And the Super Pins were a nice call to the Mortal Kombat inspiration, fatalities, if you will. Let's see, I sidebarred. See, I still stumble anyway. The power-ups, nice callback to WrestleMania. The Super Pins are basically this game's version of fatalities. For example, one of them, Owen sitting on a throne, or the throne just comes and crushes the opponent. Cool stuff like that. And they sold videotapes and things. You can look it up now on Google, but, they actually sold, WrestleMania game tips and In Your House game tips on videotapes, or you had to buy certain WWF Coliseum home video releases to get these codes to do these things. The things we would go through back in the day to play our freaking video games. Anyway, let's get back on track with the review here. Let's see. Ultimately, the best strategy was always to learn a few combos and otherwise button mash your way to victory, which could limit the length of time you would play this game once you played through all the characters of your choice. That is one drawback of this game. Similar to WrestleMania, the arcade game, you got to enter in like a secret vault code to be able to, succeed and work through with, these games. And you hate to be a button masher, but that's really how you can get ahead here is button mash, button mash, button mash, learn a combo or two. That's what I always did. I'd learn one or two combos, usually what they printed in the book, learn the least complicated, down, down, left, or, not ones that were like down, left, up, down kind of stuff. If it was like down, down, left, X, you and I were going to be great. But that was, what I found to be the best strategy. For the love of the arcades, I didn't write that opening line right at all. For the love of the arcade style is what I should have written. I would recommend anyone give this game a shot if you've never played it. It can typically be found cheap, but I also suspect people take advantage not only of the retro market, but also the fact that this is a WWF branded product. If you can find a copy for $15, you found someone pricing it fair. That's my opinion. Like when I bought my copy, it was $20. Markets come down a little bit. I think $15 for the game complete is fair. And we could disagree all day long, but there's no official listing for that. My final score out of 10 would be to rate this one a 6 out of 10. I'll save what my WrestleMania the Arcade game review is until the day that episode takes place, but much like the movies, this sequel to the original took a few steps down despite the additions made to the roster and the gameplay options. So, I like In Your House quite a bit. Obviously, I gave it a 6 out of 10. It's not the worst game ever, but it didn't really expand too much upon WrestleMania the Arcade game. Yes, it introduced power-ups, and yes, it did the fatality-inspired super pins. But otherwise, the gameplay mechanics are still very much the same, if not somehow, like, slower. Maybe they slowed it down a little bit. I don't know. Something always felt off about playing it, and even, again, playing it a little bit before recording this episode, something felt weird about the gameplay. I don't know. Maybe it's just I haven't played the two side by side in a while. Maybe that's an experiment for me to do in my free time. Play a couple rounds of WrestleMania the Arcade game, and then play a few rounds of In Your House and see how they play side by side. But it certainly tried to be different from WrestleMania the Arcade game. It added some characters from the original. We got some real commentary from Vince and Mr. Perfect, although I will say that the volumes and the levels of their commentary in this game reminds me of the time that the commentary levels for the 1996 Royal Rumble earlier in the year this game came out were completely out of whack. I think they have fixed it on Peacock nowadays. Like if you go and listen to it, it doesn't sound as bad, but back in 1996, when I watched that pay-per-view, Mr. Perfect and Vince McMahon sounded like they were eating their microphones all night long. And they weren't, because they showed them on camera. The mics were great placement, but I think somebody had the levels up super high. And I think that same case happened here. I think whoever did the mixing for Acclaim in Sculptured Entertainment, whoever was responsible, I think they left the commentary a little too high on that. But all the same, this game is fun. It's a nice follow-up to WrestleMania the Arcade game. I'd rank it below WrestleMania the Arcade game at the end of the day. WrestleMania the Arcade game spanned a couple of different consoles. I don't know, maybe because, like I said with the movies, it was the original. Sequels always pale by comparison a little bit. And I think that's what happened here with In Your House. Plus, WWE, WWF was just in a rough business spot at this time, so I think maybe that might have affected outlook on things. And then in 96, I was craving that simulation style game. Like we've talked about the Dream game. We talked about it during Legends Challenge episode. I was starting to crave more of that simulation style. So that's where In Your House misses for me. It didn't get me to simulation style. We got started on that road with WWF Warzone in 98 or 97, whenever it officially came out. I can't remember. I always forget. Let's look it up real fast. We're wrapping up the episode anyway. But that's what I was craving. So I think that's part of what helps. So, you know, kind of a carbon copy of WrestleMania, the arcade game. It was 1998. Thank goodness. Kind of a carbon copy of WrestleMania, the arcade game, but all the same, still fun. And you'll spend a few dollars less if you were to pick this up over WrestleMania, the arcade game. I see WrestleMania, the arcade game still fetching about $25 to $30, depending on your seller or your store. But yeah, I give it a 6 out of 10 in your house, which I think is pretty fair, considering it's a carbon of WrestleMania, the arcade game. But on that note, my friends, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up this week here on Dropkicks and Joysticks. It's been a wonderful time going back into the way, way, way back machine to revisit In Your House on the PlayStation 1. And next week, we're not going to go so far way, way, way back, but we're going to go back and talk about maybe one of the most critically dragged releases in WWE modern day game history, current console type stuff. We're going to talk about WWE 2K20. It's one of the only WWE games that I waited months to buy. And we'll talk about why I didn't buy WWE 2K20 at the release. We'll talk about, obviously, why I was happy to wait it out. We'll talk about all the different modes. We'll talk about how it was received. We'll talk about the WWE at the time of the game's release. We'll talk about a whole bunch of it. That'll be coming up next week, right here on Dropkicks and Joysticks for episode 16, our Sweet 16, baby. And we're going to talk about one hell of a disaster of a game. It kind of makes sense. A lot of Sweet 16s were a disaster. I talked in the Backyard Wrestling episode last week about how my 16th birthday was spent backyard wrestling and coming up with a story to have Phil explain to his parents how he got his head cracked open. You know, these things can be disasters. So we'll talk about a disaster of a game next week right here on the show. But as always, as I like to say at the very end, in some varying form or fashion, until next week, stay safe out there, stay happy out there, have fun out there, and I'll see you again right here next week for another episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. All right, the light singing returns.